Welcome to Sound Leadership with DJ. I am your host, DJ. Sorry about that. Wrong podcast. Welcome to Common Ground with SMK Medical. I'm your host, Demetrius, a healthcare consultant and a senior healthcare consultant with SMK Medical. So, Common Ground with SMK Medical is a podcast that provides an open and informative platform for discussing common issues in the healthcare industry. We understand that healthcare professionals need to stay up to date with the latest issues and trends, and we believe that that's critical. So, this is why we developed this podcast. In each episode, we expect and we hope to divulge and engage in relevant and timely topics such as healthcare priorities, healthcare policies, survey readiness, emerging trends, and so much more. Our podcast will feature exclusive interviews with top healthcare professionals and top healthcare executives, and they will offer their valuable insights into their experience and expertise into the field. Our goal is to provide you with information that you can apply to your work in your healthcare industry. This podcast is not just designed for nursing administrative director of nursing, but for all people in the healthcare industry. We hope that after each podcast, our guests will walk away feeling inspired and motivated to be great in the healthcare industry. Today, our focus is on the Iowa case that is making national news, right? There was an Iowa nursing home administrator whose facility was cited at the IK level, as I call it, so immediate jeopardy level. They received a K. They were cited for 3 citations for this. So sit back, buckle up, get ready to be engaged as I walk you through my findings in the 2567 and give you my perspective on how facilities handle issues in cases such as these. What we found, or what the state found, was that a resident was locked outside of the facility for roughly 11 hours. This facility was relatively old facility. They had previously allowed their residents to smoke. Well, a week prior to this resident being locked outside of their facility, this resident, this facility received a new administrator. And that new administrator decided to change the rules and the regulations and the policy within the organization to not allow the facility residents to smoke anymore. Based on the 2567, the administrator and the team failed to properly inform the residents of this new policy change. They did, however, post signs up at the door and around the facility, but they failed to hold a proper resident council meeting, which is very important. And I must say that, right? Anytime you make any facility changes, you have to hold a resident council meeting. So the administrator and team failed to hold an engagement committee to let the residents know that, hey, we will be stopping for smoking this said day. What the 2567 states is that the facility changed the code to the door and told residents on that said day that they were no longer allowed to go out and smoke. Well, if you're a healthcare administrator, if you're a nursing home administrator, you know that you can't do that. You can't just restrict the residents' rights. You just can't change policies without following the proper procedures and the proper protocols. And in this instant, right, proper procedure and proper protocol was not followed. You have several residents who were active smokers, right, who went out and smoked several times a day. I've oversaw facilities where there was a smoking, and I've wanted to change the facility to a non-smoking facility, but there's a way that you do that. And the way that you do that is you have to engage the residents. You have to hold a resident council meeting. I got the long-term care ombudsman involved as well as we prepared to make this transition. I met with each resident, every resident, and not just the smokers, but the people who potentially has the right to smoke, and said, hey, effective this day, we are going to become a smoke-free facility. From there, we grandfathered all the residents in who were previously smokers, and we allowed them to smoke until they A, decided to stop smoking, or B, transition to a new facility. And when I say transition to a new facility, I don't mean transition to the hospital and then came back and then we didn't give them back their rights. No, that meant they were discharged out of our system, and we did a formal discharge, transferred that MDA as an active discharge, and we closed them out as a resident. What this facility failed to do was any of that, right? They didn't meet with the residents, allegedly. They didn't meet with the residents individually and offer them their rights and talk to them about their rights to transfer to a smoking facility. They also did not work with the nursing department to offer quit the nic or nicotine patches to these residents. That's very key because if you're going to restrict somebody's rights and tell them that they can't go smoke, you have to have a plan in place for these residents to quit smoking. Everybody knows that quitting smoking is a challenging act. So if a resident is just told that they can't smoke, there will be behaviors. There will be issues that will happen. And those behaviors, right? According to 2567, a resident said, "Hey, I'm going to go out and smoke." The director of nursing and administrator and team told this resident, "If you go out and smoke, and if you leave, you will be considered an AMA." The patient refused to sign the documents and was assisted outside of the facility. Remember, I told you that there was a change to the code. Get out the door. So the resident didn't have the new code. The staff physically opened the door for this resident and allowed this resident to roll outside and smoke. When they allowed this to happen, they aided this resident in physically leaving outside. But the state paperwork later revealed that this resident, who has a VIM score of 15, went outside, smoked, and was out there for approximately 11 hours before this resident was able to get a taxi and try to attempt to transition or transfer into the taxi. Failed. During that 11 hours, staff went out there and checked the resident twice. Mind you, this is Iowa. It gets cold at night. Staff checked on this resident twice. The 2067 alleges that staff stated they were scared to go and chat with the resident and give the resident any kind of cooling blankets or anything because they were scared that they will be retaliated against and they will be fired. That's another thing we have to talk about is that culture. Still, that they will be retaliated against and they will be fired. So they didn't go out to help the resident. So here it is. You have a resident who has rights, who has no POA, who has no guardian, right? And who has his free mind to go outside. And a facility tells his resident, if you go outside and you leave our property, you'll be considered AMA. I think what some people fail to realize is that long-term care facilities are not prisons, right? Residents still continue to have rights. And as an administrator, we must honor those rights. So after the resident failed, the taxi called 911 to transition this patient to the hospital. The patient went into the hospital, and it is alleged that this patient was not allowed to come back because he was a smoker and left AMA. This facility was cited for 3 citations, right? The first citation being F561, which is self-determination, and we can expect that. F600, which is abuse, and F622 is safe discharge, right? So they received 3 K-level citations to the tune of over $125,000. Now, as a healthcare consultant, I work with agencies and organizations all across the world, and I don't think any organization can afford to cite $125,000. They're immediately lasted roughly about a day before it was moved down to a E-level at all citations. What I found in this story interesting is there were several failures in this story. The facility failed to update their policies timely. When they presented the policies to the state regulators, the policies were dated 2014. The policies, once they were updated by this administrator who got there a week before this incident happened, he failed to notify the staff and notify the residents of the new policy, which is a violation and a major no-no. I also determined that the culture is not conducive to the staff, right? Because here, nurses, CNAs who are trained to care for these residents, and they are scared to go out and protect these residents or speak up for these residents because they're scared of being retaliated against. That's not safe, and that's not a culture that residents or staff should be in. What I also noticed in this 2567 is that as they spoke about the resident missed medications for 11 hours. I'm a healthcare consultant, a nurse home administrator, but I'm also a registered nurse. And this patient was a diabetic and had not received this insulin or any key medications that resident needed to sustain life. Well, here it is. We have this resident once again who left AMA. We didn't assist him to call a taxi. We didn't do anything with this resident, but we know that resident is there. I think as an administrator, as a healthcare executive, we have to think about the compassion that should have been bestowed to this resident. My suggestion as a healthcare executive, as a healthcare consultant, is that anytime an organization makes policy changes that impacts patient care directly, you should hold a resident council meeting and you should speak with the residents before you make any drastic changes. If it is that impactful, such as this one, where a resident wanted to smoke or resident it impacted smoking, I think you should involve the long-term care ombudsman. I think if you're going to do any changes of from a smoking facility to a non-smoking facility, everybody needs to be on board. You should also hold a staff meeting to let the staff know that this is the changes that need to come, that's going to come down. And then lastly, I think you need to hold behavioral meetings with your social worker and the resident because you can expect some behavior. So your staff should be prepared to provide thoughtful and encouraging interventions to these residents, not just say, no, you can't go out and smoke, right? Maybe activities need to step up and offer additional activities during those usual smoking times if you're going to restrict smoking. No matter how you do it and what you do, you have to put the residents first. And I think that 2567 shows clearly that the residents were not put first. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the physical court and see if this administrator loses his license or is it just a citation. But I think we should stay tuned, and I'll continue to bring updates to you as I read about them and as I hear about them. But once again, this is Common Ground with SMK Medical. I'm the host, Demetrius, Senior Healthcare Consultant. I thank you for tuning in to Common Ground with SMK Medical. We strive to create a space for meaningful conversations on the present issues facing our healthcare industry today. We hope you found this discussion informative and engaging. We look forward to continuing to bring you valuable insights from top healthcare executives such as myself and all others who will come next. Remember to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay to Common Ground with SMK Medical.